For the record, State Representative Reginald Bolding, Reginald Bolding, Legislative District 27. So first I want to say thank you all for coming this morning. We're here to discuss an important issue, an issue that myself and members of the community have been calling for many years, and that is for our governor, and that is for members of the Legislative Governmental Law Committee, and that is also for members in other appointed positions to stop the talk and actually take action. As a member of the state legislature, and as a community leader, and as an African American, it is painful every single day to have to pass this Confederate monument when we know exactly what it was here put forward in general. When we talk about the Confederacy and all that it stood for, it signified that African Americans should not be seen as human. We should be seen as 3/5 of individuals. And once we had that conversation as a country, there were individuals willing to put their lives on the line because they believed just that African Americans should not be full citizens. And those were the Confederates. And during that time, they committed several atrocities, whether it was hanging, raping, murdering individuals who looked like me, quite frankly, because they were black in this country. In the 1960s, when we began to talk about the Civil Rights Movement, again, there were individuals who used the Confederacy and symbols of the Confederacy as hate to say again that African Americans should not have equal rights. And that's when this statue behind me was actually eradicated in 1961. When we began to talk about civil rights, when we began to talk about making sure that African Americans had equal rights, that's when this monument was put here. So it's in no form, shape, or fashion put here in order to honor the soldiers that fought. It was put here to say, that African Americans should not be seen as having equal rights. Now today, in 2017, when we have a president who is looking to divide this country, that's looking at every single opportunity to push back against not only people of color, but all individuals throughout this country, he's using rhetoric again that continues to use the inspiration of the Confederacy to say that you're not American enough. So it's absolutely fundamentally important that we take down symbols of hate, symbols of intolerance, symbols of bigotry in this country. And that's what we've seen represented from, quite frankly, our president, and the silence from our governor to take a stand and take leadership in this state is deafening. The silence is deafening to be the leader in this state and to not force the committee to meet to have a conversation so the public can have its say. Many of you have had questions regarding, where does this stop? Do we look at the streets named after George Washington or Thomas Jefferson? Quite frankly, we're talking about the Confederacy. We're talking about a group of individuals who chose to succeed from the United States, a group who fundamentally believe that African Americans should not be seen as human. So these are separate conversations, and I'm glad to be here today to stand with a number of supporters in our community to say that the talk is enough. If our governor is serious about his repudiation of neo-Nazis and his repudiation of everything that we saw in Charlottesville, our governor would actually stand up and he would pick up the phone and he would call our Legislative Governmental Law Commission and have them meet today. And in his absence of doing that, what he is showing people in the state of Arizona and people across the country is that he sympathizes with this monument. Until he shows us otherwise, we have no other interpretation to take but that. So again, I'm glad to have you all here today to have this conversation, one that needs to be happening today as we see our president, who has been the divider-in-chief, come into the state of Arizona, come into our state capital, and we'll be again speaking just miles from here to again say that we will not tolerate symbols of hate in this country, in this state, or in this city. With that, I'm going to welcome up Congresswoman Kirkpatrick.
Thank you, Representative Bolding, for your leadership on this issue, for being here today, and thank all of you for showing up as well. I'm going to start with quoting one of our Republican presidents who said this: "A great nation does not hide its history. It faces its flaws and corrects them." Those words were spoken by President George W. Bush. Standing behind me and standing with me are courageous leaders in this community who agree that we should not have this Confederate War Memorial. I think we do need to own our nation's history. The most important fact about the Confederacy is this: it was wrong. It was a government dedicated to the principle of slavery, that some people should be able to own other people. Now, how can we look our children at our children and tell them that we celebrate that government? Another important fact: this memorial was built in 61. No, not 1861, 1961. It was put here at a time of violence and terrorism against Black Americans, to celebrate slavery, to fight against civil rights. That's the reason it ought to come down. President Bush said a great nation faces its flaws and corrects them. Let's correct this flaw by removing this monument from this public space where we celebrate our values. In this place, we should not celebrate slavery. After the violence and horror that took place last weekend in Charlottesville, Americans are discussing and debating. And any discussion and debate is valuable. We need to have that. But for our elected leaders, talk is cheap. Rejecting the legacy of white supremacy requires more than talk. It requires action. That's why today I'm calling on action from the President. President Trump, if you want to bring this nation together, then ask Speaker Ryan to pass the Voting Rights Advancement Act and sign it into law. Representative John Lewis of Georgia and Terry Sewell of Alabama wrote the act in order to protect every American's right to vote. In 2015, I was a co-sponsor of the act. And let me tell you why. We need the Justice Department to pre-clear changings to voting laws, because now in the 21st century, we still see local governments run elections where subtle policy changes make it more difficult for people in poor communities to vote. Make it more difficult for people in tribal communities to vote. Make it harder for our Black and Latino neighbors to vote. Make it harder for our elders to vote. Now let's look at how technology has advanced. At this point, my 2-year-old grandson is almost able to grab his mom's iPhone, buy tickets to a movie, order lunch, and even buy action figures of the characters who appear in the movie before she even notices he's got the phone. That's how fast our technology moves. But somehow, we're making it less convenient for our citizens to vote. Well, we can stop that. We can protect everyone's right to vote and protect the security of our elections by passing the Voting Rights Advancement Act. The act would ban last-minute changes to voting rules that adversely affect voters, ban the practice of adding new barriers to voter registration, require Justice Department clearance for reducing the number of polling places, and we saw what a problem that was here in Maricopa County last year. It would enhance voter protections for Native Americans and make it easier for them to vote on or off tribal land. We used to get almost unanimous votes in Congress when it came up for authorizing the Voting Rights Act. The last time the Senate did so, it passed 98-0. Today we have an act in need of modernization. Hundreds of representatives and senators support the Voting Rights Advancement Act. President Trump, it's time for you to support the Voting Rights Advancement Act and protect everyone's right to vote. Governor Ducey, let's remove this memorial and say once and for all that we do not celebrate slavery or the government that fought to uphold such an ugly stain on our national honor. And now I'm going to turn it over to a man who has been an advocate for our students in this community, another great leader, Lawrence Robinson.
Well, I'm Lawrence Robinson. I'm on the Roosevelt Elementary Governing Board. It's a school district located here in Phoenix that serves kids who primarily come from backgrounds of poverty. And before I begin my remarks about why we do a disservice to those kids when we allow memorials of hate to stand, I'd like to thank Congresswoman Kirkpatrick, who for all of her years in the Congress and leadership here in Arizona has always stood for what is right. It's why the people of Arizona continue to support her. I want to also thank Representative Bolding, who has made the issue that is now on the national stage being discussed perhaps even down the street by our president today, one that first really came hold here in Arizona before really it was an issue anywhere else. So thank you for your leadership, Representative Bolding. So what are we teaching our kids? We went through an election in 2016 where we saw civility go out the door. We elected a president who has no tolerance, let alone acceptance, for his fellow Americans. And we've lost the ability in the legislature, which we're standing right in front of, to discuss the real issues of the day. In our state legislature, we chose to adopt laws that were progressive. We gave women the right to vote here in this state before a lot of other states did. We allowed folks to live under a libertarian spirit where everyone had an opportunity, and we protected the least among us. But to protect memorials of hate, like the one that we're standing in front of, is bad for business. We have a Governor Doug Ducey, who ran on making this state open for business. And to make a state like Arizona open for business, it has to be welcoming to everybody. We've learned that in our history. We were one of the few states that had to enact the MLK holiday on the ballot. It was a black eye for our state. It lost us many conventions and sports events, and it really put the people of Arizona and this economy behind. Similarly, because of the leadership of Representative Bolding and Congresswoman Kirkpatrick, we're now talking about removing these statues and memorials of hate. What's important to know is that Arizona has not gotten out of the shadow of SB 1070 and all of the other hateful acts that have passed here at the legislature. And this legislature has abdicated its duty to talk about what's important for business, but also for our kids. Look, when the president isn't someone to be looked up for, you gotta look more closer to home. Governor Ducey is that person. I believe that if he were to call on the legislature and to follow the lead of the elected leaders behind me, then he could put Arizona on the map once again for saying enough with the nonsense and the hate, enough with honoring traitors to our country. Let's pledge allegiance to a real symbol, our flag that unites us, not leave memorials of hate up that divide us and put us further behind. But most importantly, for those kids who are coming up, the kids who the majority of which in our Arizona schools are Latino, the kids who the majority of which are coming from lower economic backgrounds, the kids who may wonder what job they'll have in the future. Let's give them the opportunity to create a state that is united, a state that is ahead of the curve in our country, and a state that says enough with hateful memorials that went up a few years ago. Let's take those down and instead put memorials for the future and our kids up. And so I really want to thank everybody who has been leading on this issue, and let's just do the sensible thing and unite as a country against historical figures who try to divide and conquer our country.
happy to take any questions if anybody has some, and we'll sort out who answers them.
Are you asking the governor to just outright take this down, or do you want a discussion to start about this?
So, quite frankly, the governor has taken a stand that he wants to pass the buck. He wants to pass the buck to a group of citizens that are part of two boards and commissions. The Legislative Governmental Law Commission, which is chaired by Mr. Kevin Domena. That commission has the ability to relocate this monument today. The governor also has the ability, he can take executive action to remove this today. We also have the National Geological and Historic Board of Names that has the ability today to rename the Jefferson Davis Memorial Highway. The governor, quite frankly, has decided, whether it's politically motivated or what, that he wants to pass the buck to citizens. In that same respect, the governor is unwilling to call on these commissions and these boards to meet so the public can have a chance to use their voice. So, quite frankly, the governor wants it both ways. He wants to say that he doesn't stand for hate and rhetoric, but at the same time, he's unwilling to do anything to allow the public to actually have its say. To say, again, we don't want these memorials, monuments, and highways of hate in our state.
Well, thank you all very much, and for withstanding this heat. It's not easy to be out here today, but thank you all very much. Have a good week.
Got everything you need? Yep.